Hi, I'm Josh, and welcome to my September 18th Friday Reads, followed by a quick book haul. It's been a pretty good week. The weather here is phenomenal. I do not like Ontario weather in general, but September, that's the perfect month to be in Ontario. I have a lot I want to talk about this week. I guess I should start with what I actually read. So this week I wanted to read 3 books. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, and Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. As per usual, I decided to let the fates decide, so I used the quantum number generator to choose which one I wanted to read. And I believe the first one that I started was Tuesdays with Morrie. Actually, I don't know which one I started. It might have been this one. I did end up finishing these 2 regardless, but I never got to this one. And before today, I was planning on reading it this weekend. I've decided I'm not going to be doing that. This probably is going to go back to my TBR shelf indefinitely. I didn't read it last month. I'm not going to read it this month. I'm just not in the mood for it. And I'll talk about what I'm going to read in its place after I talk about these 2 books. First off, let's talk about Lovecraft Country. So this one was a little disappointing. Like, it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it more than my last horror book, which I think was Zone 1, but it was still not as exciting or as amazing as I thought it was going to be. It is a horror Lovecraft story that follows this group of black family members and I think some friends who get intertwined with this almost like Lovecraftian cult that have these magical powers and they can do these things. It was a fun ride. I mean, I'll give it that much, and I liked the conclusion in general, but overall, I felt like the story was kind of all over the place, and when it finally all came together, it felt kind of rushed. Like, sure, I like where it went, I just don't like how it got there. It felt like they were setting up like a sequel or a series, all like up to the last 20 minutes of the story, and I feel like that kind of story shouldn't be that abrupt. It needs to be a clearer arc to the finish line, and I just don't think it did that. That said, I'm still going to give this 4 stars, probably on the lower end, because it's still better than 3.5. Like, it's a solid book that I really liked. It's just I think my expectations were a lot higher for it, so I'm talking more critically about it just because I was expecting it to be the bee's knees. This is a period piece set in the 1930s during the Jim Crow era, and honestly the most scariest part about this book are the aspects that have to do with race and racism. The actual horror Lovecraftian side, the ghosts and whatnot, honestly didn't scare me that much. And granted, I'm not an expert in Lovecraft, but I feel like this wasn't a very Lovecraftian book. It's got it in the name, and there might have been a couple monsters here and there that were, but in general it felt more like urban fantasy, witches and stuff. Again, take it with a grain of salt because I haven't read Lovecraft. Now, the reason I read this book was for the Black Future Book Club, which is going to be doing a book club review of this, I think, in early October, like the 5th or 9th. One of the lead hosts on that, Erica from The Broken Spine, I believe she said she was actually reading as much Lovecraft as she could leading up to this. So I'm interested to hear her talk about how Lovecraft compares to this and how much of this is Lovecraft versus not, because maybe my idea of Lovecraft is what's warped and not this book. Overall, I would definitely recommend this. It's a great book, and I think you will enjoy it if it sounds like a topic you would enjoy, if that makes sense. I mean, you know whether or not you'd like Lovecraftian horror. Other than that, it is a TV show. I did start the TV show before I started this, and I think that may have been part of why I was sort of lost or felt like things were kind of not focused enough, because the TV show is different. They have a lot of similar plot points and similar characters, the same characters rather, but there seem to be certain key directions that are being overlooked. Either that or I was completely lost in this book. Granted, I've only watched the first 3 episodes of Lovecraft Country. So that pretty much summarizes my thoughts for that. Remember to check out the Black Future Book Club, and if you haven't read it, you still have time to read it for that book club. Tuesdays with Morrie. I read this. Done. No. I gave this 3.5 stars. I think when I first read this, which is nearly a decade ago now, no, more than a decade. It was 2007. I was a teenager, and I had a very different outlook on life. In this book, I loved it. Probably would have given it 5 stars based off my memory of how I felt about this book. It made me feel very strongly. And with the death of my grandmother, I was hoping to feel more and be able to, I guess, relate more to the conversation about loss. But I felt like that's not really what we get. Granted, part of it's that this book is really why I don't read self-help books, because they feel kind of obvious oftentimes. Either that or they're just quacky bullshit, to put it frankly. And this one wasn't quite too obvious. There were some, I guess, details that made me not hate it. Like, I didn't despise it. If it was just a bunch of sentimental bullshit, I would have just given like 2 stars. I mean, the reason I didn't really like this book was that a lot of what was being said almost didn't feel real. Like, part of it, like, it was walking the line of being a Hallmark movie. And some of the lines, some of the discussions that were had felt like something you would hear in Hallmark, which makes me kind of skeptical about whether or not everything that's presented in this book happened exactly or said exactly as Mitch Albom portrays it. Maybe that's a little harsh of me, but that's what it felt like. And I'm not here to read or watch a Hallmark movie. I want reality. And I mean, there is some harsh realities in here, like obviously the guy's dying. All in all, it did feel overly sentimental. The gist of the book is you need to find someone to love, people to love, and I guess self-reflection, which I guess is positive. When it comes to whether or not this helped me with my grieving process, I don't think so. I mean, I did cry a couple times, mostly just because I stopped to think about it in relation to my grandmother, and of course that made me sad. The concept of finding people to love, he didn't quite say it, but it did sort of feel like he was pushing the idea that if you want to be happy, you need to find a family. Obviously, isn't necessary. Personally, I do think you need connections to be happy, but I don't, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert of this. But neither is he. It's the problem I have with this book. It pretends like he's an expert because he's dying. Like somehow he has some secret answer key to life, and he doesn't. And Mitch Albom almost glorifies him as if he does. Like I was saying, the main idea is find people to love, to show your love, to show that you care, and have a lasting impression that you're proud of on the world. And what I will say is that my grandmother definitely reflects a lot of the principles that Maury is pushing in this book. Yeah. But in general, it wasn't entirely Hallmark, but it walked the line in a way that I just didn't love. Granted, it wasn't super religious. There were very little conversation of religion in here, which I appreciated. But nevertheless, it's very sentimental and kind of obvious stuff. Like, oh, don't be so attached to the physical world, to the material world. Have people to love. It's almost as if J.K. Rowling copied this book when she was creating the entire series. Where you have the biggest flaw for Voldemort is that he has no one to love, or he loves no one or something. Some bullshit like you see here and here. You get what I mean, hopefully. So the book was more annoying than anything. I don't know if I regret rereading it, but I definitely hate to see this book that it used to be like a favorite sort of just cast away as a mediocre book, to be frank. I don't know if I'd recommend it. Maybe if you're a teenager and you're trying to understand life, this might be good. Like, this really resonated with me. I won't pretend like I don't also share the outlook here. There's a conversation to be had about whether or not my connection to my family and a lot of the love I feel, and how much of that was already existing when I read this book versus maybe this book sort of ingrained in me. I would lean on the side that I already felt that way, and that's why I sort of resonated with the book originally. It sort of reflected my own feelings back at me, which worked really well at that time. As a teenager, it worked great. As an adult, living in the real world, not so much. Those are my feelings. I'm not reading this. The fun thing about not reading this is that in another world, of the quantum worlds that is, I get this as the answer when I was trying to pick from these three or these two or whatever. And in that world, I at least started that book. And so it's interesting to think how this is a world where I haven't read that book, but then there's a world where I have read that book. So let's talk about what I am reading. What I decided was I have a lot of e-arc, including also electronic audiobook arcs. I don't know what you call that, arcs that I want to get to. So I'm going to be spending the weekend listening to arcs that I had, partly because I need to get to them, but also because they seem casual. And honestly, I found the last couple weeks of the books that I've been reading to be really heavy books, making me think more than I want to. And I just want a break. I really thought Lovecraft Country would be an easier, funner read than it was. And it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. So I decided to read 3 books. Let's start with the first one, the original by Brandon Sanderson and Mary Robinette Kowal. This is actually the first ever Brandon Sanderson I've ever read. And this is an audiobook that came out on the 14th of September. This is about a futuristic world where your memories are saved as you check in regularly. And in part of the check-in is that it sort of recharges the nanobytes, or the nano, what do you call them, that are inside of you, that is sort of helping keep you young, keep you healthy. And what happened is this one woman, she wakes up as a new creation. They recreated it and they made a clone of her based off of her previous assessments because her original self committed a heinous act, and now they created her with a slight modification to hunt down her original self so that she could be brought to justice for the crime that she committed. And the story is a mystery thriller, sci-fi. And I actually finished it this afternoon, and it was really fun. I'm probably going to give it 4 stars, I think, on the higher end. It's nothing particularly special, but I mean, it was exactly what I wanted at this time. It was fun, easy to read, and the concept was you know, it was cool. It was a cool concept that did, I think, do a good job of talking about this conversation about what would this world actually be like where you have this type of technology, and what are the implications on the people, on the society, and on the government. And as always, Mariana Kowal does not disappoint. In any case, it is a great book that was well made. Novella, rather. It's a great novella. And the audiobook is fun too. Like, in general, I really liked the audiobook. The narrator was fantastic. She wasn't the best ever, but she did everything great, like I like. Like, she has really good voices, independent voices. And then they have some sound effects that they throw in there. In general, I don't like sound effects in my audiobooks. I want like a narrator talking to me with distinctly different voices. But when I hear audio or music, it distracts me, especially when I'm listening at double speed. It's just not the same experience. That said, some of the sound effects I think did help set the mood, sort of get you into the scene. Then there are other times that I felt like it was kind of distracting. That's more a personal thing. All in all, 4 stars goes to the book and to the audiobook. That's sort of all encapsulated in there. Sounds like something you're interested in? Have at it. It's a lot of fun. Then the next books I'll be reading are Shut Up, You're Pretty, I think. I don't know who this is by, so let's look at the cover. This is a queer fiction book. I don't know what it's about besides that. I know that the cover is and was gorgeous, and that's why I really requested it, probably also because it said queer. And then after that, I'm going to be listening to The Hollow Ones by Guillermo del Toro. And as we all know, this is the famous director and creator of a lot of very dark horror or dark fantasy type films. He also apparently writes books. I requested this because it had his name on it. I'm hoping it's a fun, enjoyable, horrific ride, especially since it's basically Halloween. Now, speaking of the NetGalley app, the first time I listened to an audiobook on NetGalley, I hated it. It kept skipping, it kept stopping, or reverting to a different moment in the audiobook, and like it would mess up and then it would go back to something I'd already listened to, and I wouldn't even know where I was at or what point in the story I was at, and it was literally unusable. So I'm happy to see that the new iterations of the app that have come out are working much better. You've had troubles with the NetGalley app. I think they may have been improved a bit now. I almost forgot that I have books I want to talk about, new books that I've bought. Now, I'm trying to put myself on a book buying ban. I'm spending too much money and I have too many books to read. But these are books that I bought like in the last month before I made that decision, even though this decision seems to happen every couple months, and I figured I'd talk about them. The first one is a classic collection of the Grimm fairy tales. This is one that I've never actually read, but I'm sure we're all familiar with this. I figured it'd be actually a really fun thing to try and read all the stories in here. And also this edition I really like. It's a nice, professional, hardback, sturdy. Moving on. This is a nonfiction book that I can't wait to read. It's called The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. The subtext is Race and the Imagination from Harry Potter to Hunger Games. And this is a conversation of how race is handled in fiction. And I thought this would be a fantastic read, a fantastic conversation trying to analyze and understand how race fits into pop culture. And then I have a couple horror that I get from a list of diverse authors, from a list that was actually sent to me, thankfully, by Erica at The Broken Spine. Thanks for that list, by the way. And this one is The Devourers by Indra Das. And this one, I don't remember what it's about. I just don't like the cover, and when I looked it up, it seemed nice. It's just some type of horror. And The Hole by Hae-young Byun. This is another horror story. I believe Gabby from Gabby Reads has read this. I do not remember what it's about, and I'm not that interested in knowing what it's about. I just know it's horror, and that's enough for me. Then I have a couple more fiction that I want to get to. First off, let's say the book of Night Woman by Marlon James, and I don't know a lot about this. I think I heard about it from Onyx Pages. Another one that I was really excited to get, which is Clay's Ark. I believe this is book 2 of the Patternist series by Octavia Butler, and I actually got this new edition. Literally just came out. I think I ordered this months ago from a bookstore in Toronto, also recommended I think by Onyx Pages, and that was because I found the first book in the series with that had updated cover, and I absolutely love it. These are stunning. I would show you the other one, but you know what? It's over there. I don't want to get it. And I've actually never read the Patternist series. I think it has to do with aliens. That's all I know. And the Octavia Butler slow read is coming up, so I wanted to go ahead and have it on hand. Now I have 4 nonfiction books that I want to get to, and I am really excited about these. First off, I have 2 books of a trilogy by Leonard Susskind and others. First one is Classical Mechanics, which I think this is just a review of classical mechanics physics. When I bought this, I thought it was going to be more for the general public, and I'm not sure if it is. I think I have a good enough background to understand everything that's in here, but like when you look at it, it's almost like a textbook. And I don't think it'll be as casual a read, but I think it'll be interesting to see the same material that I've learned a while back in a, I think was meant to be a plain, concise manner. And then I got the third book, because the second book was way more expensive than these 2. Quantum Mechanics. This one I'm not sure if I'm able to connect to, as I've never studied quantum mechanics, but considering my recent love of the material and the many worlds perspective, I like to at least give it a shot. I really love these editions, this sort of like handwriting on the cover mathematics. These are the UK edition, and so I got it from Book Depository. And the second one, like I said, was like twice the price, so I figured that was just gonna have to wait. And then a couple more that I'm even more excited for. This one, Robert Sapolsky, Behave, the Biology of Humans at our Worst and Best. And I'm super excited for this book because I was trying to find books that had to do with basically free will and what drives human beings. Like, I understand a lot of people believe in free will, and that's your prerogative, but I don't. I have a very deterministic outlook on life. So the question arises then, what is it that drives us? What is it that is making these decisions for us, or that drives us to make the decisions that we make? And I'm hoping that this will give us a beautiful background. It's nice and thick, and I probably won't get this year as bad as I want to, but soon next year, early next year, I'm going to read this book, and it's going to be really good, I hope. I'm really hoping to learn a lot from this, and I'm really excited for that one. Another one that I'm really excited for, probably the most exciting book I have bought this year. And I mean, as much as I talk about quantum mechanics and the many worlds perspective that I love playing around with, and sort of my love for that pales in comparison to my love of time in the real world and in fiction. So this is The End of Time by Julian Barber, and this is a like 1999 book that is not on audio, but I am willing to push through it because I'm really psyched to learn about this. There's a lot I want to say here, so bear with me because this is what's going to close off the vlog. I actually got approved for an e-arc of his newest book that's coming out, which is like an updated look at something to do with time, not quite the same overlook that I think this book is, but I was really excited about that, and I was like, yes, I'm going to read them both together. I had this big plan for Nonfiction November. I'm going to read a bunch of books all about space and time. And this book in particular, what it's about is this concept that time is in fact an illusion. Time is not real. Now, that's the terminology that he uses, and honestly, I'm not a fan of that because it implies that time isn't there. I mean, time is still a dimension of the universe. But what he's saying is that the moment that we perceive as the now is not what is real. In reality, the dimension of time, every moment in time is just as real as what we happen to be experiencing this. The way our consciousness is interpreting the now as unique, it's just an artifact of how our brains work and how we interpret what's around us. But in fact, every moment that you remember should be playing out in the same way that what we're doing is playing out. That's as real as the now. And that can be inspiring, it can be terrifying, and it can be daunting. But honestly, I think it is just a powerful, powerful way of looking at the universe and thinking about space-time and everything. Like, even my grandmother's dead. I mean, she's died, and it's devastating having to think about having to live the rest of my life, probably most of my life, without her. But there is some comfort in knowing that as real as my experiences are now, every experience that I once experienced should still be happening so long as space-time still exists. And the fact that I'm here says space-time still exists. The thing is, though, is that my understanding of time is based off of broad discussions of time and space-time itself. And I never really had a hard discussion about this concept of time being complete, like in the stasis of the universe. And that's exactly what this is. And that's why I think it'll be the perfect book for me, because it'll have this conversation that I think at this point, since I talk about it so much, I need a more formal understanding of exactly how a physicist, or generally physicists, might see it. Now, it should be clear, obviously there are limits to what we can know of the universe, and I understand that, I accept that. I'm still a skeptic. I'm not going to believe everything absolutely. But I think what I'm saying here, my understanding, is that it's consistent with our understanding of physics and the universe, and it's a reasonable conclusion based off what we know, even if there are limits to what we can know. And I cannot articulate how much I just love this idea, and that's why I'm so excited to get to this, and I cannot wait to read it. Like, this book it's challenging a fundamental paradigm of how we see the world. I know that's a very big conversation I just had, but it is really, really exciting. Like, if it's not apparent yet, I love books that just challenge my perspective of the universe. I have to talk about this. Let's go back to the book that I read. This is going to be a really long Friday reads. I'm sorry, but I'm having so much fun. This book, the big villain, his goal is to prolong his life. And part of it is that he wants to just understand everything in the universe. And it made me think to myself, what am I, the fucking villain of my life? Because that's what I want to do. My goal is to understand the universe to the best of my ability. And that's why I'm a scientist. But more than that, I consume as many books as I can because I want to, one, just because it's fun, but also consume different perspectives, different ideas, different conversations that are had. But also, when it comes to nonfiction, I like learning about broad concepts of the universe, and I want to push my understanding of it. I don't know what my point was there. That was a thought I had in that book that I wanted to mention. I felt like they saw me in a very bad way. They saw into my soul that doesn't exist, by the way. All in all, though, I'm excited for all of these books, most of all, the end of time itself. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you've been here the entire time, you know, why don't you give me like a clock or an hourglass, something to indicate the concept of time, just to show that you stuck to the end. Thank you all if you have. This has been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you're reading and stay safe. Goodbye.